Everything you're about to hear is for education and entertainment purposes only. Whilst we are licensed, we're not aware of your personal financial circumstances. Any advice is general advice. Equity Mates operates under Australian Financial Services Licence 540697.
Equity Mates!
I will say this about investing. Everything you do learn is cumulative. What I learned at 20 is useful.
Welcome to another episode of Equity Mates, a podcast where we explore what's possible in the world of investing. If you've just joined us for the first time, a massive welcome to the community. My name is Bryce, and as always, I'm joined by my equity buddy, Ren. How are you?
I'm very good, Bryce. Very excited for this episode. We are speaking to our mortgage brokers, the man that got us both into the Australian property market, Chris Bates.
That's it. Love speaking to Chris. Now, before we jump into it, a reminder, if you would like to speak to Chris and the team, you can head to equitymates.com/advice and we'll connect you with Chris and the team. As Ren said, he helped both of us get into our properties. Now, today we're going to cover off the latest in market movements in property here in Australia. We unpack some questions from the community around stocks and property, and then we have a scenario that we want to take Chris through that I think is pretty relatable to a lot of people in the Equity Mates community. So, Ren, without further ado, let's do it. Well, Chris, welcome back to Equity Mates.
Good to be here, lads. How you doing?
Very well, very well. So today we're going to cover three kind of key areas of property, market movements and what you're seeing from the buying landscape. A few questions have come in around stocks and property, or stocks versus property. And then I've got a scenario that I think might be relevant to a lot of Equity Mates listeners that I'd love to present to you and then kind of get your thoughts.
Yeah.
33-year-old podcast star.
Yes, yeah.
Married, about to have a kid. Yeah, just an anonymous scenario that he wants to get your advice on.
Oh, yeah. No, let's do it.
Well, speaking of advice, we should pick up where we left off last episode with you, which was where you encouraged us to get our houses revalued, or at least spoke about how easy the process was, and a lot of your clients do it to then go on to use it for debt recycling or whatever. So I just want to say I did do that, and it was very easy. Straight through you guys.
And was it very lucrative as well?
Yes, it was a good result, very good result. The place down the road had actually sold
that's
for
right.
a fair chunk more, which is what also kind of made us think about it. But just, I guess, to shine some light on the process, emailed you guys because you're our broker. Ben set it up very easily, and we got 3 valuations.
Yeah,
2 of which I was surprised they literally just did it online. I am imagining they looked at realestate.com.
Yeah, they just looked at the sale down the road.
Yeah, and the sale down the road. And then the third one, someone actually came to our house and was there for no more than 30 seconds.
Did they walk inside?
Walked inside, measured the front, had an iPad, bang, 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 bang.
Oh, like photos?
I don't know what. He's just like, leave it to me, bang, 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 bang. And he was out the door and I said, do I get a result? He's like, you'll get one tonight. And
so hold on. Before you give us how different were the results?
The variance was 200 grand.
Quite a lot.
Oh, okay.
Between top and bottom.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And were the desktops the highest, or was that's called a short form val? So the 2 first ones, which were done on a computer, they're called desktop vals. The short form, which is the actual person rocking up to your house, versus the desktops, how did they order?
2 on the low end, both exactly the same, and then 1 on the high end, and one on the high end was the desktop.
Was a desktop.
One of the 2 desktops.
Yeah, not the one coming to your house. So that's interesting. So that's sometimes what happens, right? So sometimes we have to play a bit of a valuation game, which is what we did with you, and do multiple valuations at different banks and just see if we get lucky with a desktop val. Yeah. And you can sometimes find that one of them will be way out of market, and then that'll give you more options, whether it's for recycling, whether it's for renos, whether it's just to build a buffer. So it sounds like you got the result there, which is good. So not all 3 vals came in at the same price, and you're like, they're all just, there's no difference there. And even it's sometimes even if that val is higher and it's at a bank that's slightly higher interest rate, you may say, well, that's worth it to me because I get more buffer, I get more options. And so don't always have to focus on rate. Sometimes you focus on actually who's going to give you the best val.
Well, thank you for encouraging me to do it. And if you want to I guess, work with
Whoa,
Chris.
whoa, you haven't given us the result.
What do you mean?
Did your val go up or down?
It went up.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
All we got was the differential between the three.
No, it was a great result. Yeah.
A great result.
Yeah, great result.
Wow. Well, lucky when you were buying, Chris told you not to buy that first place you were looking to buy and steered you in the right direction.
Absolutely. I mean, a lot of my journey revolves around Chris and the team. Yeah. I mean, we knew we got that place at a very competitive price. Yeah. So to see that reflected in the val was good.
Nice. Well, let's stop pumping Bryce's tyres up. If people want to speak to Chris and the team, equitymates.com/advice. We'll put you in touch. We'll share your details and they can help you like they helped both Bryce and I. But Chris, we want to get to what you're seeing in the market because you told us when we were chatting before this episode, you're seeing some positive buyer movement to start 2025. What does that look like?
2023, 2024, years of high rates. And so even though your property's done quite well, it's been a tough market, right? Borrowing capacity extremely tight. A lot of concern around where rates are going and how long are they going to stay high? Are they going to stay, where they are now for 4 or 5 more years? Are they going to drop, etc.? And January is always a little bit of an interesting month because there's very little properties on the market, but we usually get a good litmus test. And brokers generally are a really good understanding of what current demand is or if it's building and who's entering the market because people go to brokers first very early on in their journey. So I would say January was a typical January. I wouldn't say it was, out of control like we've seen in other years, like 2022. It was crazy how many people entered the market, or 2021 that might have been. But just as the more and more confidence over the last month or so around where rates are going, and that rate cuts are almost imminent or they're going to come in the next few months, we have seen buyers pick up. And it hasn't been as intense as probably September, October last year, where there was real expectation that rate cuts are going to come, but they're also going to come quite steep. There was a period there where, there was some really, poor job data in the US came out and expectations were rate cuts were late 2024. But coming into 2025, there has been an increased momentum. I would say that it's typically still a lot of first home buyers that are trying to get stability and security and wanting to enter and want to get out of the rental market. That's still really strong. I wouldn't say the upgrader market's really back in full force. And I do think there's the people who've got houses or properties, the investors are still quite strong in the market. I do think it's going to be similar to 2022 when the first rate increase happened, where it wasn't till it happened there was it kind of was a big sigh of, that was concern because rates were going up. And I think in this situation, it's not until that first rate cut actually happens that people will be like, actually, well, now it's happening, more are coming, I want to now jump on. Whatever the problem with when more buyers enter at a similar time, it's usually before sellers enter. Similar to 2019 when Labor lost that election, Liberals won, a lot of buyers thought, hang on a sec, rate cuts happen, APRA stepped in. So it was all these positive sentiment things happened. And then a lot of buyers entered on a small number of properties on the market in 2019 and prices really ran. That's the issue when you increase demand because supply is very, there's a lag, whether it's new properties or whether it's listings. And the election's an interesting one, right? Like it's only a few months away. How that plays out, and there's some different policies around, accessing super and trying to stop, foreign investment. There's going to be interesting to see what happens over the next few months and how that affects sort of, property sentiment.
When there is a rate cut, like at the moment, serviceability is about, or borrowing capacity is about 5 times household income. When there's a rate cut, let's assume 25 basis points, and the banks pass it on in full, what does that generally equate to in terms of an uplift in borrowing capacity?
Not much, 2.5%. So if you can borrow $1 million, now you can borrow $1,025,000.
Right.
And everyone's already basically borrowing at the max, particularly, in the capital cities, right? And so if you give them an extra 25, what's going to happen to prices, right? But what you will see is that when people feel a little bit of FOMO in the market and they miss out on a property, you went through this experience, you then don't want to miss out on the next one. And so, for example, if you see in the market and we've got a client competing on a property in the inner west this weekend and, just talking to them, it's a cracking asset, but there's 15 buyers on it. Multiple buyers agents, and they're going everything they can to get in. And so if that price, as an example, and new properties only just started coming on, given it's February, right? And so there's a lag of, no many properties come on like November, December, January, and then in February they start coming on. So this is when you'll start to see auction clearance rates. And even last week it jumped. And then you'll see that prices have moved a bit and everyone's like, oh, actually I need to buy. And then there's this point where everyone starts the ripple effect and prices start running. And so I think that's what we might start seeing over the next few months is that people go, hang on a sec, I could have bought that property for 1.6 or, 1.1, late last year. Actually, now it's 1.2. I've got to get moving. And so A, they're going to use that extra borrowing capacity, but B, it's this sort of intergenerational wealth that is happening more and more in our capital cities.
Well, Chris, look, we could speak about price movements all day, but I think we want to talk more about how young people, people of all ages who are listening, can approach property. And one of the most common questions we get here at Equity Mates is stocks versus property. And we, although people think we choose a side in the fight, we are asset agnostic as long as people are building wealth and investing and making their money work as hard as they work. But you mentioned that you have some thoughts on how young people can think about that choice and also, I guess, the sequencing of that choice.
Yeah, absolutely. So if you are pro shares versus property or you're anti-property, I think you're missing a trick. I think they're just literally like tools in your shed, right? You should use them some at this time and some at other times. Even like crypto, I'm all in crypto or I'm all in property or I'm all in shares or I'm all in bonds or, commercial property. I think you just look at them all and they've all got pros and cons and you should be using them at different stages of your life. I think that for younger people, I think you should definitely be getting into shares, if I'm honest, as early as possible. I think the reason why I'm a massive fan of it is that it teaches you to be comfortable with volatility and the benefits of, building a portfolio and watching growth and compounding, etc. So, as people are sort of saving for a deposit, even if it's in a few years' time, you're trying to buy a property, I think just getting experience in the property and share market's a really good thing. So often for a lot of young people, it's building up a bit of an emergency fund, and dollar cost averaging into shares and tracking and learning, how to enter the market, right? Which is your cup of tea. I think what happens is once people start to see some good results there, as in they've been doing it for 3 to 5 years and what seemed to be a little is actually now a nice little nest egg, sometimes they go, I'm just going to keep doing what I've always done because it's worked, and it has worked, right? Some compounding returns potentially if it's a good market. What you might want to consider though is using the benefits of leverage though at this point, right? It's saying, well, yeah, I've saved $100,000 in shares and yeah, I could still get 7-8% returns on that compounding and that's great. But if I've also could use that $100,000 and leverage that and get into residential property, maybe that 7-8% returns on $100,000 won't seem that much if I get a much better return in property.
Well, and without knowing the actual numbers of Bryce's revaluation, that takes your example, if he had $100,000 in shares, put it in property and leveraged it with, $1 million loan, and all of a sudden you're adding just $100,000 in value to the property, then your return on equity is 100%.
Well, that's right. And it's tax-free potentially if it's your home. But I mean, over short terms, property can go other ways. You know what I mean? And
definitely.
I think what the interesting thing is here, let's say you do get to that $100,000. Let's just say in the moment, there's lots of 5% deposit home loans around, which are, amazing. And we're doing lots of those home loans for clients. So that $100,000 maybe even be able to buy you, not up to $1 million, might be able to buy you $800,000 property, right? Have a little bit of money for an emergency fund. 5% deposit, you pay a bit of stamp duty as well, depending on where in the country you're buying. But a lot of people think that if once I've done property, I can't do shares. And that's not right. I think what you really want to do is if you use that deposit to buy a property, you might then make a decision to invest in that property. So you say, I might not buy any more shares right now, but I get more bang for buck if I paint the place, which costs me $5,000 and I'll do it myself, or rip out the carpet and put some cheap floorboards in and tidy up the garden. And so you might, spend a little bit of money on the property, which adds a fair whack to its valuation. And then at some point, depending on where you buy, and this is why it's so important to know you're not just buying any property, you're getting an asset that's got great fundamentals, that's likely to grow over the short to medium term. But once you build a bit of equity there, then you can release that and then get back into the shares. And also you can, the more that money you save on a regular basis, you can pay off your home loan, which means you can release more money to get back into shares. And ideally, what you want to get to is, okay, well, I put $100,000 into property. But then I've also now released 100 grand out of the property to get back into the shares. And so, yeah, you've maybe lost the market momentum on holding shares for 3 or 4 more years that it's taking you to get there. But now I've got property and I've got shares. And then every time I build more equity, I can always buy more shares. And so you can have both. You just haven't got stuck of just owning shares. That's the key thing there. The key thing with property is that you can pull out equity without paying capital gains tax.
And you get a tax benefit when you pull out that equity as well.
Once you're in.
Yeah, then the game begins.
Yeah.
So scenario, someone has 50 grand in shares and they're looking to buy a property. They've been taught for 5 years. These are long-term compounders. Don't sell, let it go for 40 years. It's ingrained. Are you kind of suggesting it actually might be better off selling down those shares to go towards the property, get the property you want, and then 3 or 4 years down the track, get back in?
Yeah, get back in. That's right. And obviously when there's a major market correction, you're going to find that hard to do, right? But if you can get out along that journey, and I mean, it's hard as well when you've had some real big winners there, and you know, there's so many behavioral finance elements into owning shares, etc., like that. But I do think what you want to realize is that they're always going to be there, right? You can always re-enter the stock market and it's much easier. Maybe you haven't got as much market exposure, but you can get back in there. And I think at some point, it's not just all property or all shares. It's kind of balancing the two. And at some point you might go, I've got quite a fair whack of equity in my property right now. I could go down the investment property route, but I'm much more passionate around building a portfolio in the share market, right? And so any equity I get, I'm going to put it into shares. I'm not going to go and buy investment properties. But there is another catch-22 there where if you are on high incomes, you know, you might say, well, I've only got 100 grand equity in my property. I could re-leverage that into another $1 million property or $800,000 property. And then you've got the benefits of leverage again into an investment property. And so, I think it's just using them both at certain times.
Until more banks offer principal and interest style loans on investing in shares, that is the best way to get leverage. Yeah. But can't wait till I can get $1 million mortgage on Commonwealth Bank shares. That's actually a good way for Commonwealth Bank to keep their share price high. Commonwealth Bank offer loans to buy their shares.
Yeah, that's true.
Anyway, separate conversation. So aside from that sequencing, is there any other considerations when you speak to people, you know, exploring the possibility of taking some of the investments they've made and getting into the property market? Aside from that sequencing that you spoke about there, when else should people think about one over the other, or pairing the two together, or finding a balance between them?
I think at the start of the journey, I think you've just got to be a little bit careful if you're getting exposure to individual stocks or your whole deposits in the market. In the share market, is at some point you might just say, look, I'm going to start to just diversify a little bit more and put more and more in cash, because it's becoming closer and closer. So if there was a major market correction, you've just got the ability to still enter the property market without having to wait for your share portfolio to come back.
Do you have a rule of thumb on like timing? Like within 3 years, you want to be 70% cash, or like anything like that?
Look, I think that's where you're going to an advisor, right? An advisor would be sort of trying to talk to you about timing. I think general advice is, generally the longer in the next 5 years, you'd want to have it in cash. We just got to really weigh that up. Like if it takes you still another 2-3 years in the market and you've gone all to cash, then, you haven't got that market growth. And so I think it's just a mentality of, I'm going to start de-risking myself and getting myself in a position to buy into the stock market and slowly slowing down my portfolio. And rather than this rash decision of, I'm 2 years out now, I better just have it all in cash. I think there's a benefit of being in markets, I think, from a behavioral point of view, of just getting comfortable with it and through cycles. And so, if you've bought into the market when you're young and you had a really good run, you haven't really had the experience of when markets aren't performing very well. And I think it's the lessons you're trying to accrue in these younger years. It's just the experience of buying and selling and holding and, being comfortable with volatility, because then as you get older, the numbers get bigger. And so you need to be more and more comfortable. And those early days, I think, are so important. I think once you've got some properties, at some point, if you can't get quality property assets, I think you should be going to shares. And so there is a mentality for a lot of people in the property market. It's just more property. Any more property is better. I don't believe in that. I think, the compounding returns on, shares versus poor property, and just the confidence and being able to sell down your portfolio and shares at any point in time versus a lumpy property and maintenance. And there's so many reasons why not to buy property. And as you get closer and closer to later life, in retirement, I don't know whether resi property is the right decision at all. Do you really want lumpy assets? I think I'd want things that I can sell down and the ability to sort of supplement my lifestyle if I wanted to sell down shares. And so I think it's really hard to recommend resi when you start getting in your 50s. I think it should be more maximizing your super and shares.
Recommending supermarkets instead.
Yeah, and that's true. Yeah, and commercial property is a big thing. I mean, and they are, through accountants, and whether you're buying it through like a REIT or whether you're buying it through like a little fund or whether you actually can afford the whole supermarket, that commercial space is, more and more enticing as you get older.
Probably a few commas in our net worth away from buying a supermarket.
Well, yeah, but here's the interesting thing. Correct me if I'm wrong though. You have to put down a higher deposit, but the serviceability is done on the lease, right? It has nothing to do with our income.
Yeah. Like the lease payments should cover the borrowing.
So all we got to do is 40% deposit for a supermarket.
What deposit do we need to buy a supermarket?
Look, it does change. Commercial lending is a really funny one. Like it's where banks are like risk on, risk off, right? So some banks will want to play in that space, whether it's childcare or supermarkets or offices, and some banks are like, no, I don't want any exposure to this. And so it's always changing. Commercial policy is always changing, and I think you've just got to constantly be looking out for, because the LVRs will change. They'll say one day,
but like rough. Give us a figure that we need to directionally work towards.
Probably like your 30-40% deposit's probably the number. But at some point, so you need a 60 or 70% LVR is sort of what you want to be aiming for.
What's the supermarket?
Yeah, but we actually don't know what the face value is. Like, what dollar amount should we be aiming for?
Well, I think so. You speak to someone like Scott Keck, even Scott O'Neill, at Rethink, he's probably one of the most successful commercial properties, and where they think they get better value for money is when you start getting, the 8-figure number, right? Like 10 mil plus. Like it's
so we need 40% of 10 mil. So all right, we can get 4 million in. Yeah. We might need a few more of those revaluations.
There's a sweet spot, I think, where a lot of the lower end, are you taking a lot of risk, with tenant risk and market risk? And the returns can be there, but you're taking a lot of risk. If you get it right, it works really well. If the market moves, you can get crushed. But I think there's a sweet spot where a lot of mums and dads can't play, but then a lot of the big end don't want to play there.
Yeah.
Well, Chris, we're going to take a quick break, and then on the other side, bring it back to a scenario that's a bit more realistic than trying to buy a supermarket. So we'll be right back. Welcome back to Equity Mates. We are here with Chris Bates, our mortgage broker. If you would like to chat to Chris and the team, head to equitymates.com/advice and we will connect you. He does an awesome job and certainly helped us get into our homes. Now, Chris, I have a scenario here that I'd love to run by you. So kind of pretend that I'm the client, I guess. Yes. And then I guess a question at the end that I think will be a bit relatable. So husband and wife, early 30s. Living in Melbourne, inner city, loving their life there, plan on buying a place. Their 5-year goal is kids, like in the next few years. Yeah. So they're in this position where they want a place that straddles that inner city life, but recognize that I think growing into that, they'll fast outgrow that. They have a budget of $750K, utilising the 25% deposit from the Victorian government. So they only need to put down a 5% deposit. Pretty healthy savings and share portfolio and have their emergency fund sorted. But in terms of household income, sub 250. Salaries will just rise in line with inflation, potentially a promo or two along the way. Their current hurdle is what should they be focusing on when it comes to buying a house? Because they are really stuck with this whole, we can afford something in a city to get this lifestyle. We don't want to move out. The properties that we could get in a city aren't amazing. If we get one half an hour out on a train, they're a lot better. I'm sure a lot of clients come to you with this sort of situation. Where do you see most people go wrong in this scenario?
Melbourne's an interesting market, so that's the first thing to consider here is that every market's got sort of different dynamics to it. For example, in Sydney, it's they're even trying to buy something that is your future home is really difficult, right? Like, so in that scenario, change the numbers, but saying to someone, hey, why don't you buy something you're going to grow into is actually hard, because that's often the housing market, right? And it's not even affordable. So Sydney's a bit different. Sydney's maybe we're finding a real shift to let's get something that'll last us now, and let's last us if we have 1 or 2 kids, but it's not a long-term solution, because that's whether that's buying something where they want to live now or whether they even want to live in 5 years isn't an option. Right. Melbourne's a bit different. I think the market down there is really a little bit more depressed. It's had a tough time for the last, say, 7 years. And I think that decision is probably a viable one. The kids' next 5 years, it might be 2 years, might be 3 years, it might be 7 years, right? Depending on how it goes. Often when someone has one kid, they want another. And so they could go very quickly from, oh, yeah, this place could work to this place ain't going to work. And I would say that that's a bit of a concern, because once you do buy, it's not as simple of just unwinding it, particularly if you're using a home equity scheme. And, what does that mean? The rules around that, does it change with the change of government? How does it all play out? Like, I'd just be a little bit concerned about those policies, using those for anybody, but particularly if you've got a shorter time frame, how does it affect things? So, I mean, for them, it would be really challenging okay, yeah, you love this inner city life, but you're in a relationship, you're really thinking about having kids. Have you got certainty or clarity around where you want to end up in part of Melbourne long term? Like, my family's always is in the north, for example, or I really want to be down towards Mornington or down towards Geelong. And, could you get something that maybe isn't your dream place but needs a reno that you would love to live in, long term? And if you have multiple kids, it'll suit you. But it doesn't mean you have to stay there. I mean, it depends on the home equity scheme as well, whether you have to live in it or not. And that changes state to state. These home equity things are coming out more and more across all the banks. There's 5% deposit home loans, and then there's these where the government's investing with you, and you've got to really understand the terms of what you're giving up for that, So
they can't rent it. They have to buy the equity back before they can rent it out. That's
right.
That's the
that makes sense from a policy point of view. Yeah.
But I guess to your point, it's kind of like, okay, then in 5 years, you either have to have planned to have that equity available to do that, or like you're then in that tricky position of wanting to move up, but
or they sell and they move,
or sell it. Yeah.
Here's a question around the home equity scheme: do you pay the government back what they paid, or do you pay current market rate? Like, if the housing market doubles in 7 years and they sell, are they then paying the government double?
I think so.
Yeah,
that's the issue. And every
government's getting into balance sheet investing.
I could be wrong, but
and they're changing. Different states have got different, because they're trying to come up with some type of solution. And these are common around the world, right? So the governments are basically becoming residential investors. They've tried it with these backing home loans. Personally, with this situation, I would consider 5% deposit home loans, because you're just borrowing the money from the bank. You're not giving any of your equity away. Secondly, you have got more flexibility with how it works in terms of being able to rent it out. Buy it with a 5% deposit home loan. Yep, they've got a bigger mortgage, right? They've got, instead of the government funding the 25, they're funding it with a home loan. I would go and live in that property for a bit, because it's 30 minutes out of town, for example, and they still want the inner city life. I would tidy the place up. So I wouldn't get a fully renovated place, because it would likely go for out of budget and it would go for a good price. That's just the way the market is. And I would just spend a little bit of money tidying up. They said they've got a healthy share portfolio. They've got a bunch of money in cash. Like I said before, they might just rip out the carpet, tidy out the landscaping, paint it. And then I would probably just go rent and live around the city. Just go rent something and enjoy that city life pre-kids for the next, 2, 3, 4 years. You might even stay there and have one kid in an apartment near the city, because it works with work and it's, where your friends are, etc. But at some point, maybe when the second kid comes along, you can let your tenant know that you're going to move back into it, and you've got your family home there ready to go when you're going to get to the school zones and all the issues. Because it's, pre-kids, stability and security doesn't matter. As soon as kids come along, it very rapidly and surprises people that they go, actually, no, I can't afford to, get kicked out of my rental property, because that was so disruptive for the kids.
Yeah.
And it really affected getting into childcare and et cetera. And it was so stressful I thought I was going to be homeless. I had to move back in with the parents, with the kid. And that will naturally probably happen for them, but they can have their cake and eat it. So by moving into it for 3 to 6 months, there's potentially benefits with stamp duty and the 5% deposit and all that sort of stuff. But ultimately that property will grow for them tax-free, because it was their principal place of residence. And there's something called the 6-year rule, which is you can basically rent out your principal place of residence for up to 6 years.
Okay.
And so they've got a house there, somewhere in Melbourne. ideally where they want to live long term, like A, a great investment, B, where they want to live long term. They've added a bit of value to it. They're renting it out, no problems. And then when they finally do move into it, it's been growing for them tax-free. And then under higher interest rate, that negative cash flow is also deductible for them. And so they've been able to pay their rent, plus they've had to fund this negative cash flow, but that's probably still cheaper than if they just moved into it and paid the mortgage at 6% interest rates, because renting's still quite cheap. So that's what I'd probably consider for them. Then do they do that now? Do they wait for a pay rise? They might have to sell more than the shares than they wanted to. They might have to, but that kind of leads back to our last couple of points, is that it might be a short term,
Yeah. I think they're under the pump timing wise, because the Victorian Home Equity Scheme finishes up end of financial year. So
yeah, there you go.
I think for them,
if they follow Chris's suggestion,
but then that just comes down to serviceability, I guess, of being able to actually do 95% rather than what would be 70. So.
Yeah, and that would be one of the reasons you'd go for the home equity scheme, is because it allows you to get something that you wouldn't have been able to get if you went the 5%, and then that might be better than not getting in.
Yeah.
And so I think that would be the reason I would use it, maybe one day when we sell, we've got to give it back. But if it's going to be a long-term home for them.
And if you buy a better place with it, then.
Yeah, that's true as well. Exactly. So it's one you couldn't afford, and B, it's a much better investment. But also you're giving up a lot of that investment gains because and so just be really cautious with it. It's like when any new government policies comes in, is you just got to sort of really understand how it's going to work. Even when the first home super saver scheme, which is a great way to save for a deposit for your first home, there was a lot of problems with that, just getting money in and out of super funds. A lot of those things have been ironed out now, but early days it was a bit dicey how it actually works when you buy. So just be clear on,
Nice.
And explore the 5% deposit schemes and even, lenders mortgage insurance. There's sometimes a cost no matter which way you go. And sometimes just trying to avoid all those costs or a higher mortgage might be an opportunity cost for them.
Have you seen a lot of interest from people in the government schemes, like the home equity scheme?
I wouldn't say a lot. They're not sort of widespread out there, and a lot of talk about them in different states. A lot of them are going directly to the banks as well.
Well, I was just going to say the biggest challenge they have actually found compared to my and Ren's experience is they don't have a broker like you to bounce ideas off, because when they went to one, the broker's like, we actually can't broker the deal. You have to go direct to bank. And then there's only like 2 or 3 banks that do it. And in fact, CBA have just pulled doing it completely.
Oh, really?
So now there's
just too much admin for that?
I don't know. I have no idea.
Really?
And so now there's only 2 banks that do it. And their interest rate seems okay, but not sharp.
That's also an interesting consideration.
And so like they're just lost at sea in not having someone to really present them with these scenarios like you did us. It's like, here's a scenario, think about it. Here's another scenario, go and think about it. Here's another scenario, think about it. And you got it on the spreadsheet and you're looking at all the options and kind of where does this all net out.
Yeah.
That's where they really need your help.
So it's good. The 5% deposit home loans, which is the other government scheme, first home loan deposit scheme, we can do that with all the banks.
Do you avoid LMI there?
Yeah, you do. No LMI.
Okay.
And that's
So what's that one, sorry?
that's basically where the government will basically guarantee the bank. So you only have to put a 5% deposit in, you avoid LMI, basically.
Jeez, the government have got policies coming out their ears, they say.
Yeah, when that one came out, I think it was in the election, and it came out and I was like, oh my God, like it's just going to be, more demand into the property markets. But they've made more tweaks to it over the years. Single, families, can get 2% deposit. And I think it's just been a really good way to help first home buyers to enter the market that wouldn't have been able to enter. While it absolutely supports prices and it would have an impact on prices, I think it's actually turned out okay, that policy. Because there's a lot of people in the market right now who are getting access to a lot of cash. From intergenerational wealth. And this is kind of finally something for the people who haven't got access to intergenerational wealth to still be able to enter without the big costs of LMI, etc. And they've made some tweaks with the caps to sort of increase them a bit and expand the ability. It was 10,000, now it's 35,000. So I feel like it's heading in the right direction. I mean, anything that's increasing demand while not focusing on also the supply issue isn't great. But I do think that first-home buyers who haven't got access to intergenerational wealth right now are getting smashed. And so the inequality that's creating is probably offsets the negatives of just creating a bit more demand in first-home buyers right now.
Well, I'll get them to give you a call.
Yeah, absolutely.
The hypothetical scenario people.
The issue you find with these home equity things is that because they're not going to brokers, there's also a little bit of, the blind leading the blind here because they're just getting general advice and then they're just
the bank has been awful.
Yeah, that's right.
The banks just
are they speaking to like one person or is it just like
one person? But they don't give a shit. They're just like, and I don't mean that like, they obviously do, but not to this degree. It's kind of like we have the money available when you find a place that's ticked. You have the approval.
There's no
house.
incentive for them to get the loan written for them.
No. There's no incentive for them to say, hang on, have you actually considered just a 5% deposit with LMI at another bank and get a sharper rate? And like, they're just like, you've got approval for the home equity scheme. Come to us when you're ready to go.
Yeah.
Look, this is one of the advantages that brokers have over banks, right? And hence why broker market share is like 75% now.
Yeah.
And when I started, it was 40, right? And, it's heading in one direction consistently every year. The reality is when you work with a broker, you're getting a long-term relationship with someone who's trying to build a long-term relationship, is in a highly competitive 20,000 plus brokers out there right now. And so everyone's having to up their game and be better at what they do and add more value. And so they can handhold you through this and they can answer all these questions for you and give you different options, whether it's different lenders or products or et cetera. And so the banks just can't do that, right? So it's kind of like, it's not a fair game. They're sort of stuck in this general advice. This is my product, take it or leave it.
Yeah.
I'm not here to, if I'm good, I'm going to get moved on to another branch or to another position. When you're going to a broker, you just haven't got those challenges, right?
Yeah.
So it's good for us, but the banks are going to consistently have this problem where the client's going to go, I'm a bit confused here. I want extra help. I want to consider other options. All right, bang, I have to go to a broker.
Yeah.
Yeah. To be honest, I'm surprised it's just 75%. And I think, we had a great experience with the broker. I think to give both sides of the case, the one thing you got to be mindful of with brokers is you've got to assess your serviceability yourself because the incentive structure with some brokers out there is to just get people to borrow as much as possible. So I think, that's the thing you've got to think about. But I couldn't imagine having shopped around banks myself done anything like that.
No way.
Yeah, it's just
the differences in loan structures and all sorts of jazz.
Yeah, you're right there. You make a good point. The broking industry, so I came from a financial advice background into broking, and that's also gone through a lot of evolution over the last decade, right? It was a very sales industry and they, had issues with RDR and, professionalization of financial advice, right? And I feel like it's got there now. If you look around a lot of the bigger financial advice groups out there, they've gone through this fee for service and they're adding a lot of value. They're selling advice, not products, right? The broking industry hasn't made that leap yet. It's still seen as a sales industry of selling products, but they're getting better. And, and the bar's getting lifted every year. And a lot of those conflicts that were driving poor behavior have been removed from the banks. There was issues with quirks within the bank's calculators, the way that we got paid, if you did it through different lenders or equity release, or different lenders would pay different commissions. All of those things have been slowly worked out of the system over the last 10 years. There's a best interest duty now on brokers. And so it is slowly moving to more of a trusted profession. But you do have to be careful, because it has come from a sales industry into this, and through that you're still going to get a bunch of brokers out there still focusing on selling products at, and rather than just trying to think, actually, what is the best thing for clients here? The other thing brokers need to do is they need to go, well, if I'm helping someone get access to a lot of money and then they're making decisions with that and they're buying assets, if I know, I need to educate myself on what they're doing. I need to be able to stop them if they're making poor decisions.
Yeah.
And a lot of brokers haven't taken that leap, I believe, where they go, hang on a sec, if someone is doing something that I don't think is in their best interest or working with the wrong property spooker or something like that, I need to just, hold them up and have that difficult conversation with them. But that's a big leap. That's where someone's got to see themselves as a trusted advisor rather than a salesperson.
Yeah. Well, that's probably a good point to say, Chris. You did stop Bryce buying a property, and
multiple,
and you did help me and Alice putting us in touch with a buyer's agent for our area. So I think we both appreciated your service. Equitymates.com/advice if people want to speak to Chris and the team. So Chris, thanks for joining us today.
Awesome. Always good to be here.
You have been listening to an Equity Mates Media production. In the spirit of reconciliation, Equity Mates Media acknowledges the traditional custodians of country throughout Australia and their connections to land, sea and community. We pay our respects to their elders past and present and extend that respect to all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples today. This podcast is intended for education and entertainment purposes. Any advice is general advice only and has not taken into account your personal financial circumstances, needs, or objectives. Before acting on general advice, you should consider if it is relevant to your needs and read the relevant product disclosure statement. And if you're unsure, please speak to a financial professional. The hosts of this podcast and their guests may have positions in the companies mentioned. Equity Mates Media operates under an Australian Financial Services Licence 540697.